Okay, and the final thing I wanted to do was give you an update on the InSight mission. This is the next lander for Mars. It was launched on May 5th. It will arrive at Mars on November 26th. And so this is just a painting of the InSight spacecraft. It's designed to primarily look at the interior of Mars. It's got a seismic experiment, a very high sensitivity seismometer, and a heat flow experiment. It will, if all goes well, be able to drill down about 5 meters and then take measurements of how the heat is escaping from the interior of the planet, which will tell us a lot about the interior. And so the museum does a program called Scientists in Action, where occasionally we're able to go to really exotic places like Vandenberg Air Force Base, where this was being launched from, and interview the experts that are actually working on the mission and have conversations with schools across the country. And so we did one of those broadcasts on the day before the launch. Had about 2,000 school kids from Connecticut to Alaska and Mexico on the calls. And once that was over, we got to actually roam around Vandenberg. And so this is just some of the past stuff to give you a feel for the spacecraft itself. So the lander is all tucked into this aeroshell. There's a heat shield on the top. So this is the part that enters the atmosphere. This is called the cruise stage, and that's the external spacecraft that actually gets it to Mars. These are solar panels. And so this was the payload fairing once they'd loaded the lander into it. And so the afternoon before the launch, we were able to drive around and go out to the launch pad. And this, I've never been to Vandenberg before, been to Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral numerous times. This is a very different setting. The ocean is beyond those hills, and here's the launch pad and the assembly structure, and the rocket is right there. And so this is a little closer view from the parking lot outside the launch pad. So we're about maybe 100 meters away from the pad, and barely in here you can see the rocket. There's an umbilical plugging into the payload fairing, and there's the rocket. And so about 5 hours before launch, they roll the assembly building away from the rocket and leave the rocket on the pad. And so we were back in that parking lot, and Greg Koronowitz, from our digital media department, set up his video camera to do a time lapse. So this covers about 20 minutes or so that it took to roll the structure back. And you can see floodlights here, and it's getting very foggy as time goes on. And it's just sort of interesting to see the process, so I'll let this play. So this is an Atlas V launch vehicle built by United Launch Alliance, which is headquartered here in Centennial. And the spacecraft itself was built by Lockheed Martin down in Littleton. So lots of Denver connections for this mission. This is at Vandenberg Air Force Base, so it's north of Santa Barbara, south of Santa Rosa. It's about halfway between Los Angeles and San Francisco. And so they're accustomed to launching through fog at Vandenberg. And so this concerned us a lot. It didn't concern them, and ultimately they were ready to launch. So I think my next video is going to show you what our view of the launch was. We were about 2.5 miles away, waiting for the launch to happen. We didn't have a countdown clock or anything. We're just sitting in a parking lot at Vandenberg. Oops, I'm sorry. I'm a little out of sequence here. So these were other pictures we took just to give you a feel for what that looked like once the rocket was sitting there on the pad. So here's the payload fairing. InSight is tucked in here. All these umbilicals are blowing air conditioning basically into the payload fairing to keep it clean and dry. I'll show you the NASA version where they're a little bit closer. They have infrared cameras.
Go center. Go InSight.
See quite a bit more.
5, 4, 3, 2, 0. Liftoff of the Atlas V, launching the first interplanetary mission from the West Coast. And NASA's InSight, the first outer space robotic explorer to study the interior of Mars.
Marguerites continue to look good.
That's an onboard camera. It's really unfortunate that the
Closed-loop guidance has begun. And we have indication of payload fairing jettison. Looks like a good step.
And the payload fairing that was encapsulating the InSight spacecraft has been jettisoned. That confirmation of spacecraft separation behind us in the room, a lot of excited people.
Okay, so the final thing I wanted to just give you an update on is there are 2 CubeSats as piggyback payloads that were launched on the same rocket. And this is the first time a CubeSat has been sent beyond the Earth. And if you don't know, CubeSats are these sort of off-the-shelf mini spacecraft that are great for educational purposes. Lots of colleges, even high schools, if they can get funding of maybe $50,000 or so, they can buy all the pieces for one of these, go through the process. The expensive part is launching them. But there are 2 CubeSats that were on the upper stage. They got ejected after InSight was ejected. And this is what they look like. It's about the size of a small briefcase. It's about 15 inches in the long dimension, about 9 inches across, and about 4.5 inches tall. And then once it's launched, it unfolds an antenna. It's called a phased array antenna, so it's flat. And then it's got 2 little solar panels, and it's got a couple of cameras on board. And so this was one of the first images they took. The cameras are actually intended just to verify that the antenna has deployed and the solar panels have deployed. And so this is the parts of the spacecraft here, the antenna. But the thing that was interesting is there are 2 little blobs in the field of view, and it turns out that's the Earth and the Moon from several million miles away from the Earth. And so they saw the mother planet as they were launched. And what the experiment that these are going to engage in is they will be flying overhead as InSight is landing on November 26th. And so they will, if they work, they will be able to relay all of the telemetry very quickly from the lander to back to the Earth. And there are other spacecraft, Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter and Mars Odyssey, which will also be looking at the spacecraft, but they have to record the telemetry on board, and then it's an orbit later, so roughly 90 minutes later, that they can play back the telemetry. If the CubeSats work properly, then they'll be able to do that in real time. And so that's the basic plan, or the basic experiment for them. And so just the only update I've got is the first trajectory correction maneuver, TCM-1, was made in the last week by the InSight mission. So that was the first it got to use its onboard propulsion system. That worked just fine. It's going to take about 6.5 months to get to Mars. There's the potential for 5 of these correction maneuvers if they need them. And this is just how the spacecraft will, or the CubeSats will be flying overhead as InSight is plunging into the atmosphere. And just a painting of what that might look like as they are flying past Mars. So we'll be updating as the summer goes on. We'll be doing an event here at the museum on the 26th. It's the Monday after Thanksgiving. I think the landing time is roughly 1 p.m. Mountain Time. And so put it on your calendars now and take the day off and come and watch the next landing on Mars with us.